Embodiment is a process of liberation. You know, many people talk about trauma being stored in the body. And so re-embodying yourself is the way to heal and release that trauma and set yourself free from those constraints, those constrictions in your nervous system and in your body. I wanted to read a quote by Francis Weller, the author of The Wild Edge of Sorrow. I feel grief has been colonized by the clinical world, taken hostage by diagnoses and pharmaceutical regimes. For the most part, grief is not the problem to be solved, not a condition to be medicated, but a deep encounter with an essential experience of being human. And I love that book, and also feel that grief, releasing grief has been a really powerful embodiment practice for me. So the forest has held me through multiple grief rituals and releases. I remember when I had nobody to turn to but Mother Earth, and I was healing from an abusive relationship. I was reading this book from another survivor, and I remember going up to a state park and being by the ocean, and just grabbing this large, bulbous piece of kelp, and I was reading a chapter on anger, and I was practicing being in better relationship with my anger and learning how to work with it in a healthy way. And so I took this piece of kelp and I started smashing it on other pieces of seaweed on the beach, and just screaming and yelling and crying. And just before I started doing this, I noticed this great blue heron on this really tall tree right behind me. And I assumed that it would have flown away during this extreme event. But it was really beautiful because I noticed after I was done, I turned around and I saw the heron, and it was just so peaceful, sitting atop that tree, just witnessing me, I guess. And it just wasn't perturbed at all. It was just there. And that to me was such a beautiful experience, to be witnessed that way, and not like another animal, not being afraid of my rage and my grief. fire has been transformational. I've had at least like 5 experiences with some sort of transmutation of old material that I needed to let go of through fire. Most of these were in community with other people that were also doing this, so it was really powerful. I also had some really powerful somatic releases during EMDR therapy last year, where, you know, if you've done this type of therapy, it's, you know how deep it can get, and how, even though it's just, you know, it seems very superficial, it actually gets to a very subconscious level of your psyche, and so it's dredging up a lot of things, and you feel like you're reliving the trauma in some ways. So I took this opportunity to not just relive the trauma, but rewrite my own narrative. And I would basically go back to sites of trauma if that was feasible, and bring offerings, flowers, things like that, and intentions, and just kind of be in a more embodied and conscious state in those places where, in an unconscious state, I had experienced a lot of harm. And of course it was very difficult, it was very challenging for me, but it was extremely healing and powerful at the same time. It's really important to have a safe container for these exercises. So I made sure to choose like a trail that wasn't very popular. But you know, at some point I didn't really care if anybody saw me. It was just so important for me to release. And so wherever you feel safe is the right place. I also participated in a grief ceremony that was at one of the retreats that I attended, where there's a lot of collective support and music making, and just like very primal like feeling, where I felt very witnessed and held, and like it was okay to just fully be in my grief. I'd never seen myself that way, but it was really amazing to be able to be witnessed by people in what I think society would consider like ugly or crazy or too intense, you know. And other forms of re-embodiment and somatic release that have been really helpful for me over the last few years have been body work. So that includes massage, acupuncture, cupping. I found these very, I would say, even critical during the beginning stages of my awakening, because there was just so much coming up that wanted to be released, and I didn't know how to deal with it except to, you know, move it out of my body. And so I actually went to massage therapy school for a while just to learn the techniques for myself. And I don't regret that experience. And more recently, I've been learning Tai Chi and Qigong, which is also, along with the body work, also ancestral reconnection for me. What I've recognized on the collective level is that trauma has become weaponized through like identity politics, different groups of people fighting against each other when they should be working together towards the same liberation. And so that has been weaponized by the media, by politicians, by companies, to create more unconsciousness, to create more violence. And I think it is important to understand how that works. What I've noticed in myself is, particularly as a neurodivergent person, I used a lot of masking and scripts to kind of navigate a highly colonized and like superficial social system, I guess. It's not all like that, but in certain situations more than others, I've had to do that. And I recognize that as I've unmasked and discarded a lot of these scripts, that my body feels a lot lighter. And I've also noticed that I haven't been able to be in these superficial spaces without a certain degree of revulsion in my body, and just like I'm just more sensitive to like really loud music and people talking about really superficial small talk topics, things like that, or ego stroking and things like of that nature. And I honestly think this is a good thing, because it's a healthy thing that I'm able to now see these situations for what they are and remove myself from them. But I also recognize that there's kind of this trade-off that happens with colonization of the mind, because I think in some ways we're trained this way so that we can like compete in this society for resources or whatever, but there's also a cost, right? A cost to our aliveness. And at a certain point, the cost is just too high. And people have traded their spiritual, they've accepted a spiritual death in exchange for material wealth. And I'm not willing to make that trade. So decolonization is actually a deeply sacred practice, because you are not only releasing yourself from these restricted patterns of like literally movement, like in my hips and things when I was dancing, but also reclaiming your agency from the colonizer while still living in these systems and knowing how to navigate them. So that gives you a lot more power and choice of what you want to do, what activities you want to engage in, what you think is healthy for you or not. So your body actually knows there's a greater intelligence beyond the mind. I remember feeling very trapped before, especially when I saw people that were more embodied than me. They seemed a little more free in their bodies. I had a bit of envy and a lack of understanding of how they were so free like that. And now, conversely, I see that in less embodied people that hold a lot of tension in their bodies, have really high-pitched voices, or speak really quickly about a lot of different things like that, where their nervous system is dysregulated. I can tell that, they're in a way being persecuted by their minds in their body, and it's really uncomfortable to see that. And I think that this process of awakening and healing and integrating has been about learning how to trust that there is a world beyond an identification with ego. It seems so simple, but living in the present is actually quite an achievement. To not always be regressing into the past and predicting the future, but rather just enjoying and being appreciative of what we have in the moment. Because I've noticed as I've aligned with the present that more things that I need come to me less effortlessly, whether it's people or opportunities, things that I'm learning. And there's like obviously those synchronicities, but I think it's because I'm actually allowing this consciousness, or I'm allowing myself to flow with the embodied intelligence instead of trying to control it with my mind. And I was watching a video by Eckhart Tolle earlier today, and he was talking about like cycles of collective awakening in human history, how in the time of the Buddha and Jesus and like so many amazing prophets and people that were awakening, these were periods of collective awakening, but also they led to periods of regression into unconsciousness, like the Dark Ages and such. But that these are sort of cumulative cycles, so even though it may seem that at some period in history he argues now is also a regressive period. It seems like we're going backwards, right? Like we're going back to the Dark Ages and a lot of authoritarianism, but also that we've accumulated a lot of knowledge and experiences collectively. And so every kind of cycle builds on each other. And so I think that is a better perspective on collective awakening than like a linear one. I think another form of liberatory embodiment practice for me has been making music or any type of creativity, although recently that's been my chosen medium. And I've been posting some of the songs that I've created and co-created with others on this channel. And to me, I think singing is actually my spiritual calling and how I hope to accurately represent myself, I guess, in this lifetime. I really like this quote by Clarissa Pinkola Estes. She wrote "Women Who Run with the Wolves." She says, talking is the voice of human, and singing is the voice of the soul. Might have been the other way around, but basically that we are channeling our true selves and we're singing. And I noticed that for a lot of people there's a lot of fear that comes up with singing or even speaking, and I think this does have to do with being criticized, being ridiculed, being kind of silenced throughout our lives by different systems, whether it be work or school or social settings. And so allowing ourselves to breathe into that space again and re-embody our voices as centers of agency and power, I think, and also beauty. It is so healing and so liberatory. So I really encourage people to practice that.